The problem with running a criminal empire, Kang had discovered, was that you still had to eat. His legitimate front, the one that satisfied the taxman and gave his accountant something clean to file, was a private members' club on Itaewon's quietest street, tucked behind a door with no sign. Yukshul. Black Iron. It was a place where senators and CEOs came to have conversations they couldn't have anywhere else, where deals were sealed over food that cost more than most people's monthly rent, and where the kitchen was expected to produce nothing short of the divine. Kang Choi is kind of man who made other men straighten their spines just by walking into a room. He ran Seoul's most powerful underground syndicate from a penthouse that overlooked the Han River like a king watching his kingdom from a throne carved out of ice. Everything about Kang was precise. His schedule. His words. His violence. He spoke in measured sentences, never raised his voice, and had never, not once in his adult life, lost control of a situation. He was the eye of every storm, untouched and unmoved. His mother had called him Salmenji as a child, cold wind, and the name had grown to fit him like a second skin. He collected art, rare whiskey, and silence. He did not, as a rule, collect chaos. His head chef had quit on a Tuesday. Stress, apparently. Kang had found this inexplicable. Stress was simply the weight of ambition. But the man had gone, and now Kang had a fully booked weekend, a kitchen full of staff with no leadership, and a problem. His lieutenant, Park Sungjin, round-faced, perpetually nervous, and the only person in the organization brave enough to bring Kang bad news, had presented him with 3 candidates. The first 2 are competent, Park said, setting folders on the glass table. Michelin experienced, both Korean, both. And the third. Park hesitated. That was never a good sign. Rebecca Johnson. 29. American. Black. She's been. He searched for the word diplomatically. Colorful in her employment history. Kang flipped open the folder. The resume read like a map of controlled explosions, brilliant placements followed by spectacular departures. But the reviews were something else. Critics who hadn't used the word transcendent in a decade reached for it when they wrote about her food. One said her short rib ramen was a spiritual experience that borders on the illegal. Another described her fusion cuisine as the culinary equivalent of falling in love unexpectedly and against your will. Kang read that line twice. Bring her in, he said. Rebecca arrived 20 minutes late to the interview. She walked into Hyukchul with a tote bag over one shoulder and paint, or possibly curry, she wasn't sure, on the sleeve of her jacket. She looked around the interior, taking in the moody lighting and the black marble and the kind of quiet that cost money to manufacture, and she said out loud to no one in particular, "Okay, this is very villain lair. I respect it." Park, who had come to receive her, made a sound like a small animal catching a foot in a trap. Kang heard her from across the room. He turned. And Rebecca Johnson, who had walked into this interview ready to charm or argue or do whatever it took to get a kitchen back. She was between jobs and her visa situation was complicated, stopped moving for exactly 1/2 second when she saw him. He was looking at her the way people looked at weather systems, assessing, calculating, utterly in control of the assessment even if not the weather. She recovered faster than most people would have. "You must be the boss," she said, walking toward him with her hand already extended. "I'm Rebecca. My friends call me Bex. You probably won't call me that for at least a month, but I'm going to offer it anyway." Kang looked at her hand. Then at her. Then he shook it, brief, firm, and said, "You're late." 20 minutes, she agreed pleasantly. The subway line 3 had a situation. What kind of situation? A pigeon situation. I don't want to talk about it. She tilted her head. Are we doing this interview standing up, or? They sat. Park sat slightly apart from both of them, the energy of a man who wished he were anywhere else radiating off him in waves. Kang looked at her resume. You've been terminated 4 times. Twice for insubordination, once for a cultural misunderstanding that I maintain was the executive chef's fault, and once, she held up a finger, because I refused to put truffle oil on a dish that didn't need truffle oil. I stand by every decision. You threw a cutting board at a colleague. He oversalted my bouillabaisse. On purpose. Out of spite. She met Kang's gaze without flinching. I have a temper. I know that. I also have standards, and sometimes those two things get into a conversation with each other. What I'm telling you right now is that when I am in my kitchen, and I mean a kitchen I'm running, I don't have these problems. I have a direction to pour all that energy. Kang studied her. Most people he interviewed found his attention uncomfortable. She sat in it like she was sunbathing. What would you cook? He said slowly, For a table of men who have never been surprised by anything? Rebecca blinked. Then she smiled, slow and private, like the question had just lit something small but very warm behind her eyes. Give me your kitchen for 3 hours, she said. I'll answer that better than words can. She cooked for 3 hours. Kang sat alone at the head of the long table in the private dining room and ate every dish she sent out. 5 courses. Each one arrived without description. She sent nothing written with it, no explanation, no pretension. Just the food. The first was a cold dish. Chilled Korean pear with white kimchi foam and a drizzle of something dark and smoky she'd found in his pantry. The contrast of sweet and fermented, cold and warm, delicate and bold. It tasted like the beginning of a conversation you hadn't expected to have. The second was a reinvented doenjang jjigae, fermented soybean stew, that she had somehow made into a thing of startling refinement without removing any of its rawness. It tasted like home and ambition in the same spoonful. By the fourth course, a slow braised oxtail, clearly in homage to her Southern American roots, over a bed of gochujang polenta, Kang had set down his spoon and was simply sitting with it, the way you sit with a piece of music after it ends. When she came out of the kitchen, flour on her collarbone and fire still in her eyes, he said, "When can you start?" She said, "I already did." He almost smiled. He caught it just before it became visible. But it was close. Rebecca started on a Monday. By Wednesday the kitchen staff adored her and feared her in equal measure. She ran service like a general runs a battle, precise, loud, demanding, and somehow also deeply warm in between the commands. She called her sous chef baby when he got a sauce right and absolutely the hell not when he got it wrong. She played music during prep, rotating between R&B, old-school hip-hop, and occasionally, to everyone's confusion and delight, trap music she'd learned to love from a previous stint in Busan. The food was extraordinary. Within the first week, members of Hyukchul were calling to make reservations they had never made before, just for the dining room. Word was spreading through the kind of quiet, certain channels that mattered in this world. Kang took to coming to the kitchen at the end of service. Not often. Not obviously. But he would appear at the door, jacket still on, tie still straight, looking like he had other reasons to be there, and he would say something about the evening's menu. Or ask about a dish. Or say nothing, and simply watch the controlled chaos of her cleaning and organizing and debriefing her team. Rebecca noticed. She was incapable of not noticing things. "You keep coming to my kitchen," she said to him one night, drying her hands on a towel and looking at him with a particular directness that made Park reach for antacids whenever he witnessed it. "This is my restaurant," Kang said. "It is," she agreed. "And yet you have a very large office on the 4th floor where you spend most of your time. And you keep coming here." She tilted her head. "Is the food bothering you or is something else going on?" He looked at her for a long moment. That measuring look she was getting used to, the one that probably made other people feel like they were being disassembled for inspection. She just looked back. "The food is excellent," he said. "I know," she said. "So?" He didn't answer. He left. She smiled at the empty doorway for a moment before turning back to her station. Jian came on the 3rd Friday. She swept into Hyukchul like weather, beautiful, disruptive weather. She had on a white dress and sunglasses she hadn't removed despite being indoors, and she went directly to the kitchen because she'd heard about the new chef and wanted to understand what, exactly, kept drawing Kang downstairs. She stood in the kitchen doorway with the particular energy of a woman who had decided she was not threatened but needed to verify it. Rebecca was in the middle of searing duck breast and did not look up. "Can I help you?" she said to the sizzling pan. "I'm Ji-an Yoo." She paused for the recognition to land. "Kang's girlfriend." "Oh nice." Rebecca tilted the pan. "He didn't mention you but that's very on brand for him." "I'm Rebecca. Please don't come into my kitchen without a hairnet, health code, not personal." Jian's sunglasses came down half an inch. "Is that supposed to be funny?" "No, it's supposed to be health code." Rebecca looked up then, and she offered a smile that was perfectly polite and somehow also perfectly unmoved. "The duck is at a critical moment. Can I help you with something specific, or are you just doing a walkthrough?" Jian stared at her for a long, slow moment with the eyes of a woman cataloging a threat she hadn't decided how to classify yet. "I'll be watching you," she said finally. "Great," said Rebecca. "Enjoy the food." She turned back to the duck. "Close the door on your way out please, the draft affects my sauce." The watching, it turned out, was literal. Jian came to Hyukchul twice more that week. She sat in the private dining room with associates and ordered from Rebecca's menu and ate it with the face of someone who was furious that it was good. She caught Kang by the arm in the corridor one evening and said low and tight, I don't like her. Kang looked at her. The food is excellent. That's not what I'm talking about. I know, he said. He removed her hand from his arm with gentle precision. She's an employee, Jian. Then why do you spend every night in that kitchen? He didn't answer. Which was an answer. And they both knew it. It happened on a Tuesday, the slowest night, the one when the restaurant was closed to members and the kitchen staff went home early. Rebecca stayed late because she always stayed late on Tuesdays. She used the quiet to test new dishes, to experiment, to have the kitchen to herself and do the purely joyful, personal work of cooking something for no reason other than the cooking of it. She was making her grandmother's recipe. Not elevated, not refined, just the real thing. Collard greens slow-cooked with smoked turkey, cornbread in a cast-iron skillet, and a pot of red beans that had been going for 3 hours. The smell was rolling through the whole building when Kang came down. He stopped at the kitchen door. The sight of her, locks tied up, dancing faintly to something coming through her earbuds, utterly absorbed, the pots around her telling a story that had nothing to do with the Michelin-starred technique she deployed for his members, stopped him in a way he didn't have a category for. She pulled an earbud out when she noticed him. Kitchen's closed for business, she said. Technically. But if you want some food, I'm not going to turn you away. He came in. He sat on a stool by the counter, which she noticed was the first time she'd seen him sit anywhere casual, anywhere that wasn't a throne of some kind, and he watched her. What is it? He asked. My grandmother's recipe. Tuesday night food. She checked the cornbread. When I was a kid in Atlanta, Tuesday was the cooking day. My grandma would have something going on every burner by the time I got home from school. Didn't matter how hard the week was, Tuesday night, the whole house smelled like something good was coming. She said it simply, without sentimentality. Just a fact she was fond of. Kang was quiet. Then, my mother made doenjang jjigae every Sunday. Even when she was sick. She said the smell kept the house feeling like home. Rebecca turned and looked at him. He was looking at the pot of red beans. This was, she understood, the most personal thing he had probably said to anyone in a significant amount of time. She didn't make a production of it. Sit down properly, she said. You're going to eat. She fed him her grandmother's food. All of it. He ate slowly, with the focused attention he gave to everything, but somewhere in the middle of the collard greens, something in his face shifted. Something in the tight architecture around his eyes softened in a way that was almost invisible and completely unmistakable. This is, he said and paused. Yeah, she said. She knew. How does someone make food like this? He was looking at her now. Like it comes from somewhere specific inside you? Because it does. She leaned on the counter across from him. Every dish I make is either something I learned from someone I loved, or something I made when I was trying to figure out who I was, or something I made because the world was being terrible and I needed to remind myself it was also beautiful. She shrugged. Food is autobiography. That's the only way I know how to cook. He looked at her for a long time. You're not what I expected, he said. No one ever expects me correctly, she said. It's one of my favorite things about myself. That was when he smiled. A real one. Small, restrained, but undeniably real. It changed the whole geography of his face, and Rebecca felt it land somewhere in her chest like a stone dropped into still water, sending out rings she hadn't asked for. She looked back at her cornbread. Well, she thought. That's a problem. He stayed until midnight. They talked, haltingly at first, then with a gathering ease that surprised them both. He told her about growing up in Busan, about the father who had trained him for the life he now led and the parts of himself he'd had to close off to lead it. She told him about the culinary school scholarship, about the years of being the only black woman in European kitchens, about learning to make her loudness into armor. When he finally stood to leave, they were standing close. The kitchen had a way of doing that, funneling people toward each other across counter space. He looked at her for a moment with the calculating expression that had become, she realized, less calculation and more something he hadn't learned how to name yet. Good night, Rebecca, he said. It was the first time he'd used her name. Not chef. Rebecca. Good night, Kang, she said. Equally deliberate. He left. She stood in the warm kitchen that smelled like Tuesday and her grandmother, and she pressed one hand flat against the counter and said to herself firmly and clearly, do not do this. Her heart was completely unimpressed by this instruction. Jian found out, the way Jian found out everything, through a network of eyes and ears that she maintained with the dedication of a general managing intelligence operations. She found out that Kang had spent a Tuesday midnight in the kitchen. She found out that he'd come back on Thursday. She found out about the smile. Someone on the cleaning staff had glimpsed it through a window and mentioned it to someone else, and by the time it reached Jian it was already a confession of guilt. She arrived at the restaurant on a Saturday service, prime time, full house, the kitchen at its most chaotic and alive. She walked past the host who tried to redirect her, past Park who physically stepped into her path and got moved aside with a look that could have stripped paint, and she came directly to the kitchen doors. She pushed through them. Rebecca was in the weeds, 3 tickets up, a sauce on the verge of breaking, her sous chef calling times from the grill station. She heard the door and turned with the expression of someone about to redirect a delivery driver, and instead saw Jian. "Get out of my kitchen," Rebecca said. Not rudely. Just absolutely. "We need to talk about Kang. We need to finish service. Out." Jian grabbed a plate off the pass, one of Rebecca's completed dishes ready to go to table 7, and she set it down with a crash that sent it to the floor. The kitchen went briefly silent. Rebecca looked at the broken plate and the ruined dish. She looked at Jian. She took a breath that she used like a tool, pressing the rising heat in her chest back down below the boiling point. "That," she said very quietly, "was a mistake. You think you can?" "I think," Rebecca said, stepping forward in a way that made her sous chef simultaneously proud and concerned for everyone's safety, "that you just destroyed food that took 40 minutes to prepare. In my kitchen. During service." She stopped 2 feet from Jian. "I don't know what you think is happening between me and your man, but I can promise you it's not worth what you just walked in here and did. And if you do it again, I will have you removed from this building by whichever large and polite person Kang employs for that purpose." Jian's eyes were bright with a fury that was partly about Kang and partly, Rebecca understood, about something much older and sadder, the particular rage of a woman who can feel something slipping and has no graceful way to hold it. "He's never looked at anyone the way he looks at you," Jian said. Her voice had gone quiet. Quiet was somehow worse than the crash of the plate. Rebecca held her gaze. And she said, with a particular honesty that she couldn't always stop herself from, "I know." Jian left. The kitchen reassembled itself around the fact of what had just happened. Rebecca looked at her sous chef. "New plate, let's go," she said. "We're not losing table 7. They finished service. It was flawless. But later, after the kitchen was clean and the staff was gone and Rebecca was sitting on the back steps outside the service entrance with a bottle of soju she'd found in the pantry, because the night required it, Kang found her. He sat beside her on the step. He was still in his suit but he'd removed the tie. For Kang, she'd come to understand, this was the sartorial equivalent of showing up in pajamas. "I heard," he said. "I figured." She offered him the soju. He took it, drank, returned it. "I'm sorry." "It's not your fault she threw my plate." She leaned her head back against the door. "It's kind of your fault that she's at the point where she would." She looked at him sideways. "You know that, right?" He was quiet. "She loves you," Rebecca said. "Or she's invested enough that it's become love. And you don't love her back. And she knows." She took another drink. "That's the loneliest thing in the world, being in love with someone who's present and absent at the same time." He looked at her. The night air was cool and the street was quiet and the kitchen light behind them made a rectangle of yellow on the pavement. "How do you do that?" he said. "What?" "See to the center of things. Every time. I told you. Food is autobiography. Cooking teaches you to look at ingredients and understand what they need, what they're doing, what happens if you combine them wrong." She shrugged. "Turns out that's also just people." He was looking at her with an expression she hadn't seen on him before, something unguarded and slightly lost, like a man who had just realized he was very far from where he had intended to go and was still not sure he wanted to turn back. "Rebecca," he said. And the way he said it, just her name, but with something in it that hadn't been there before, some weight he'd placed carefully in the syllables, made her stomach do something she wished it wouldn't. "Kang." She met his eyes. He reached up and tucked one of her locks behind her ear. His finger lingered at her temple for a moment, barely touching, the restraint of it more electric than anything less restrained could have been. Then he pulled back. "I need to end things with Jian," he said. "Properly. Before anything." "Yes," she said. "You do." They sat in the cool air for another hour talking about nothing consequential. Her grandmother's peach cobbler, his memories of Busan's fish market at dawn, and the something that was building between them was held, carefully, in a space just outside of action. Patient. Present. Waiting. Jian, to her credit, did not go quietly. She called Kang that night and they had the conversation, the one she'd been bracing for, and that he delivered with the characteristic Kang Choi precision that managed to be honest and gentle and utterly devastating all at once. He said he cared for her. He said he respected her. He said he had never been able to give her what she deserved, and that he was ending their relationship not because of anyone else but because continuing it would be a cruelty to her. She hung up before he finished. Then she called back to tell him exactly what she thought of him in language that even Park, who was listening from outside the office door in case of crises, found impressive. Then Jian declared war. The following 2 weeks were operationally absurd. Jian had resources, contacts, and the creative malice of a woman with nothing left to lose and a great deal of organizational skill. She called the health inspector, anonymously of course, and got Hyukchul a surprise inspection. Rebecca ran a kitchen so clean the inspector found himself apologizing for the inconvenience. She tried to poach 2 of Rebecca's best line cooks with significantly better salary offers. One took it. The other came directly to Rebecca, told her, and accepted a raise. In his kitchen, eggs poaching in her spiced tomato sauce, both of them in various stages of undress, his particular morning quiet settled around them while she sang to herself at the stove. He kissed her in the kitchen so often that his sous chef, who walked in on the third occurrence, took to knocking with theatrical loudness before entering. He told her things he hadn't told anyone. About the early years, the choices that had calcified into identity, the parts of himself he'd had to learn to live beside. She listened the way she cooked, fully without distraction, bringing her whole self to the act of receiving someone else's. She told him things too. About the loneliness of being the loudest person in rooms that wished she were quieter. About learning to love Korean food not as an immigrant but as someone who had chosen it, the way you could choose a second family of flavors. About her grandmother, who had died the year she was in Paris, and the particular cruelty of absence when you were too far away and too proud to come home. He held her while she talked about that. Didn't say anything. Just held her with the silent precision of a man who understood that sometimes care was not words. She kissed the side of his jaw when he did that, soft and grateful and particular. He closed his eyes for a moment and she felt his arms tighten slightly. They were learning the vocabulary of each other. Building a private language from the overlap of their impossibly different natures. Jian had, as promised, her own code. She'd stepped back from active warfare. But she had one last move and she played it on a Friday, the night of Hyukchul's most important reservation, the private dinner for 8 that included 2 senators, a chairman of a major conglomerate, and a foreign dignitary whose visit to Seoul was not officially on the record. Jian, through channels that spoke to her own considerable network, let the wrong people know that this dinner was happening. A rival faction, connected to Jian's own family, though she would deny direct involvement with enough technical truth to make the denial stick, sent men to Hyukchul an hour before service. What followed was the kind of controlled, violent, very quiet chaos that Kang's organization was built to handle, and they did handle it, in the back rooms, out of sight, with professional efficiency. No one in the dining room or kitchen knew anything had happened. But Kang was delayed. He was managing and he could not break away until it was over, and by the time order was restored and he got to the dining room, service was already underway. He stepped through the door and saw Rebecca standing at the pass, conducting service for one of the most consequential tables Hyukchul had ever hosted, entirely alone in the command. No one had briefed her, no one had warned her, she'd simply walked into a VIP situation and done what she always did, handled it. She was talking to the dignitary's translator, something she'd discovered on the fly, adjusting a dish description with calm authority. She sent a dish back because it was 1 degree below where she wanted it. She timed the courses with the instinct of someone who could read a table the way others read text. She looked up and saw Kang in the doorway. And she did the thing she always did when she saw him now, a quick, private smile before returning to the work. Fast as a flash of light. He watched the whole service from the door. When it was over, when the table was finishing their final course and the room was in the warm aftermath of an exceptional meal, he came to find her. She was in the kitchen, sitting on the counter eating the remnants of one of her dishes with a spoon, decompressing the way she always did after high-stakes service, loudly and with food in her hands. That, he said, was remarkable. I know, she said. Also stressful. Also, what happened tonight? Before service? I felt something go sideways and then right itself and nobody told me anything. He came and stood in front of her. At counter height they were nearly eye level. He put his hands on either side of her on the counter, and she looked at him steadily, spoon still in hand. He told her. Shortened, edited, the version that was honest without being a complete map of his world. She listened. Jian, she said at the end. Possibly, he said. She won't do it again. How do you know? Because she got what she needed. To see that she couldn't break it. He looked at her. And she couldn't. Rebecca considered this. She took another bite of her dish. She looked at him with the particular clarity she always brought to hard things. She loved you in the wrong key, she said finally. The song was real, it just was never going to resolve right. She set down her spoon. Is it fully over? The situation tonight? Is anyone hurt? No one who matters to you. Kang. My men are fine, he amended. Everyone is fine. She put her hands on his face, her hands which were a working person's hands, capable and warm, and she looked at him. I need you to know, she said, that I'm not going to pretend your world isn't what it is. I'm not naive about what I'm choosing. Her thumbs moved along his jaw. But I'm choosing it. The whole complicated, controlled, occasionally terrifying package. She raised an eyebrow. You're choosing me back. The chaos and the cutting boards and the music at 6 in the morning. The music at 6 in the morning is... He started. Wonderful, she completed for him. You were going to say wonderful. The corner of his mouth moved. I was going to say loud, he said. But yes. She laughed. He kissed her, there on the counter, her heels hooked behind his knees, the kitchen settling into its late-night quiet around them. This kiss was slower than the first, seasoned with everything that had happened since. The war and the Tuesday nights and the cold steps and the Sunday morning eggs. All of it present in the way they held each other now, easy and certain and warm. 6 months later, Hyukshul got its first Michelin star. The announcement made the food pages of every major publication. The review praised the menu's startling emotional intelligence and its rare ability to synthesize disparate culinary traditions into something that feels neither fusion nor compromise, but rather a new and entirely coherent language. It praised the chef, described as an American voice with a Korean heart, or perhaps the other way around, which is perhaps the point, with the kind of language that food critics reserved for the very few. Rebecca read the review standing in Kang's kitchen on a Sunday morning. She read it twice. Then she set her phone down and stood very still for a moment in the way she stood still, the way a fire stands still, gathering before the next burst. Kang, who was learning to make coffee with the focused dedication he brought to everything, looked up from the machine. Well, he said. She looked at him. The Sunday light was coming through the Riverview windows and landing on his face, and the kitchen smelled like whatever she'd had going since dawn, and he was in a sweater, not a suit, because she had staged a quiet revolution on his Sunday dress code over the preceding months. She crossed the kitchen in 3 steps and kissed him, full and warm and laughing slightly into it because she was too happy to be entirely serious. And he made a sound of surprise and then wrapped his arms around her and kissed her back. Michelin star, she said against his mouth. I know, he said. He was smiling. Fully visibly, the geography of his face rearranged by it. I read it an hour ago. She pulled back. You read it and didn't wake me? You needed sleep. Kang? He kissed her again, quieter. His hand moved to her hair the way it always did, gentle and deliberate. She melted into it the way she never would have predicted she could melt into anything, her hands in the front of his sweater, her forehead to his. I'm proud of you, he said. Every day. Not only today. She looked at him, and the thing in her chest that had been growing for 6 months, the warm, terrifying, full thing, was so obvious now that she didn't try to look away from it. I love you, she said. It was the first time. It came out clear and certain and with the same quality as everything she made, herself fully in it, nothing held back. He was quiet for one long moment, looking at her. Memorizing her, maybe. Then, I love you, he said. Measured, precise, chosen. Every word a deliberate selection. Which, for Kang Choi, was the most lavish declaration possible. She beamed at him. Loud and uncontainable and completely herself. The eggs are burning, he said. Oh damn it. She spun to the stove. He stood where she'd left him for one more moment, a smile on his face that his past self would have found incomprehensible, watching the chaos she carried with her like weather, like music, like something alive. Warm, he thought again. The word he'd used that night in the kitchen when he first understood what was happening. He picked up the coffee cups and joined her at the stove. Outside, the Han River moved below the windows. Inside, the kitchen smelled like something good was coming. Like a Tuesday night in Atlanta. Like home. Like the beginning of a story that had no intention of ending quietly. And Ji-an Yoo? She left Seoul for Busan. She opened a fashion boutique. She was seen, 3 months later, laughing on a pier with someone who looked at her the way she had always wanted to be looked at. She never mentioned Kang Choi's name in public again. She ate at Hyukshul exactly once, alone, and ordered Rebecca's signature dish and finished every bite and left a generous tip and said nothing at all. Which was its own kind of grace. Some stories end in war. Some end in something quieter and harder and better. This one ended in the kitchen, where it had always inevitably been heading. Thank you for watching. If you are new here, don't forget to subscribe, like and click on the notification bell to be notified anytime we make a new story. See you soon.